On the afternoon of September 5, 1949, more than 72,000 spectators packed Cleveland Municipal Airport as a radically modified P-51 Mustang called begin tore around the course at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. The pilot, Bill Odom, was in the lead of the Thompson Trophy race. Remarkably, he had never flown a pylon race before that weekend. Odom was already a celebrated aviator, famous for long-distance record flights, including a round-the-world journey completed in just 73 hours and 5 minutes. Jackie Cochran, the legendary aviatrix who held more speed and altitude records than any woman alive, had purchased again specifically for him to race. The aircraft itself was stunning. Its radiator had been relocated from the belly to the wingtips, and the lower fuselage had been smoothed and fared over. It looked less like a wartime fighter and more like a purpose-built racing machine designed for raw speed. On the second lap, something went terribly wrong. Odom cut too far inside pylon number 3 and attempted to correct toward pylon 4. The Mustang suddenly rolled inverted. For a horrifying moment, it flew upside down. Then it plunged into a house on West Street in nearby Berea, Ohio. Odom was killed instantly. So were Jean Lair and her 13-month-old son, Craig. The family had moved into that house just 4 days earlier. The house erupted in flames as 72,000 people watched in stunned silence. Cook Cleland, flying a Goodyear F-2G Super Corsair, went on to win the race after Odom's crash. When reporters asked him about the tragedy, Cleland was blunt. He said Odom should never have been flying in the Thompson Trophy race at all. Odom was a Bendix pilot, a cross-country flyer. Pylon racing required a completely different temperament. Odom was a good pilot, Cleland said, but he had been in the wrong race. That single crash would bring the golden age of Cleveland air racing to an end and push the Mustang into obscurity for more than a decade, but it would not kill the airplane. The P-51 Mustang, the fighter that had swept the Luftwaffe from the skies over Europe, was about to begin a second life that no one could have predicted. It would fight in Korea. It would fly for more than 30 nations across 6 continents. It would slice telephone wires with a propeller over the Sinai Desert. It would take part in the last dogfight between piston-powered aircraft in history. And 4 decades after the factories had closed, it would still be flying combat missions in the Caribbean while my jets circled overhead. This is the story of what happened to P-51 Mustang after World War II. When the war ended in August 1945, the United States military faced a problem no one had anticipated. There were simply too many airplanes. North American aviation had built more than 15,000 Mustangs during the war. At the factory in Inglewood, California, they had rolled off the assembly line at a rate of over 100 per week at peak production. Now those lines fell silent. Thousands of aircraft sat idle in storage depots across 3 continents. The cost of maintaining them exceeded any value in keeping them. The solution was ruthless. Across American Europe, crews began cutting apart perfectly serviceable fighters with acetylene torches or dropping 18-foot steel plates from cranes to smash airframes in half. A teenager named Ed Maloney watched this destruction unfold at Calero Field near Chino, California. He was a high school senior with a deep, consuming love for aviation. While other kids traded baseball cards, Maloney clipped pictures of airplanes and built detailed wooden models. Now he stood and watched B-17s and B-24s snap apart like toys. Steel plates fell from cranes and split fuselages clean in two. It was almost sickening, he later said. Then he saw something else. House-sized piles of aircraft technical manuals being set on fire. One of the workers told him he was welcome to take whatever he could carry. Maloney made trip after trip, loading his car with documents and rescuing them from the flames. That experience stayed with him for the rest of his life. He vowed to save as many aircraft as he could. He didn't have much money, but he scraped together enough to buy an old Warbird and store it. Sometimes he traded one airplane for another. Slowly a collection grew. Maloney was the exception. Most Americans saw surplus aircraft as nothing more than scrap metal. Warbirds P-51 Mustang sold at auction for as little as $1,500, less than the price of a new car. During the war, each Mustang had cost the government about $51,000. Now, they were being sold for pennies on the dollar. Some foreign governments acquired them even more cheaply, under the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, signed in Rio de Janeiro in September 1947. Hundreds of Mustangs were transferred for a nominal price of $1 each. The Swiss Air Force purchased 130 Mustangs from surplus stocks in southern Germany for about $4,000 apiece in December 1947. Switzerland would fly those aircraft until 1958, replacing its pre-war Messerschmitts with American fighters bought at bargain prices. The military saw no future for propeller-driven fighter. Jets were the future. The Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star had flown in 1944 and could outrun any piston-engine aircraft in level flight. New air forces forming around the world wanted jets. The Mustang appeared destined for the scrapyard. Then Korea changed everything. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. Within days, the Korean People's Army surged south across the 38th parallel with Soviet-built tanks and overwhelming numbers. The South Korean military collapsed. American forces stationed in Japan rushed to respond, but commanders quickly discovered a serious problem. Their jets were fast, but they could not remain over the battlefield long enough to support troops on the ground. The F-80 Shooting Star burned fuel so rapidly that pilots barely had time to identify targets before turning back. The round trip from Japan to Korea consumed most of their fuel, leaving them only minutes of loiter time over front lines. Worse still, early jet aircraft required long, paved runways. Most Korean airfields were short, rough, and cratered by artillery fire. Jet engines sucked in debris and flamed out. The sleek new fighters were useless at the forward bases where ground forces needed air support the most. The Mustang had none of these problems. It could loiter over the battlefield for hours. It could operate from dirt strips that would destroy a jet engine. It could carry 1,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, or napalm. And there were hundreds of them sitting in storage across the United States, waiting for the cutting torch. The Air Force scrambled to pull Mustangs out of mothballs. Many had been relegated to Air National Guard units. Others sat in desert storage at air bases scattered across the American Southwest. Maintenance crews worked day and night to make them airworthy again. 145 Mustangs were loaded onto the aircraft carrier USS Boxer and sent across the Pacific. The Boxer departed Alameda, California, on July 14th and arrived at Yokosuka, Japan just 8 days and 7 hours later, the fastest trans-Pacific crossing ever made by an aircraft carrier. By late July, the Mustang was back in combat. Its designation had changed. In June 1948, the newly created United States Air Force replaced the letter P for pursuit with F for fighter across all its aircraft. The P-51 became the F-51, but under the new name it was the same airplane. The Warbird that had once escorted bombers over Berlin was now diving on North Korean tanks. Lieutenant E. Hathorne was a young American pilot with barely 200 hours in the Mustang when he found himself flying with the Republic of Korea Air Force during those desperate early weeks. He was part of a small group of American volunteer pilots serving as advisors and combat leaders for the ROCAF. On July 10, 1950, Hathorne was flying a mission toward the town of Chonan when he realized his radio had failed. At that exact moment, he spotted 2 North Korean tanks moving along a road below him. He tried to warn the other pilots in his flight, but without a radio, they could not hear him. Hathorne made a split-second decision. He broke away from the formation and dove on one of the tanks. He destroyed it. Then, following the road south, he encountered 9 trucks and a half-track. He attacked them as well, tearing them apart. By the time he turned back, his aircraft was nearly out of ammunition. After the mission, He barely managed to land at Hatting, then spent 5 days walking and hitchhiking back to Taegu. That was the kind of war the Mustang would fight in Korea. Close air support, interdiction, relentless ground attack. The romantic era of high-altitude dogfighting was over. Mustang pilots were no longer hunting enemy fighters. They were killing tanks, trucks, and supply convoys at treetop height. It was brutal, dangerous work, and it came with a terrible cost. The Mustang's liquid-cooled Merlin engine was its fatal weakness. Unlike an air-cooled radial engine, which could absorb heavy damage and keep running, the Merlin depended on a radiator filled with coolant. A single rifle bullet through that radiator meant the engine would overheat and seize within minutes. There was no gliding to safety. Pilots had only seconds to bail out or die. Ed Schmud, the brilliant engineer who had led the Mustang's design team at North American Aviation, watched these developments with frustration from California. He later said the P-51 had been designed as a high-altitude fighter, meant to escort bombers at 25,000 feet, where its supercharged Merlin could outperform anything in the sky. Using it for ground support, he argued, was nearly suicidal. A .30 caliber round could punch through the radiator, and the engine would lock up in 2 minutes. But the Air Force had made a catastrophic decision after World War II. They had scrapped their P-47 Thunderbolts. The Thunderbolt was heavier and slower than the Mustang, but its air-cooled radial engine could absorb enormous punishment. It had been the ideal ground attack aircraft. The Navy had kept its F-4U Corsairs for exactly that reason. The Mustang was what the Air Force still had, so the Mustang went to war. The statistics tell the story. During the Korean War, 335 F-51 Mustangs were lost. 264 pilots were killed or went missing. Of those losses, 172 were caused by enemy ground fire. Only 10 were shot down by enemy jet fighters. The rest were lost to accidents or disappeared without explanation. The danger was greatest in winter. Korean winters were brutally cold, with frequent icing conditions. The Mustangs were not equipped with de-icing systems. Ice built up rapidly on the wings at low altitude, and an overloaded aircraft that entered stall or spin almost never recovered. It was effectively a death sentence. Conditions on the ground were just as harsh. Shelter at forward air bases was primitive. Pilots and mechanics lived in tents or unheated buildings. The cold drove some airmen to improvise heating systems using oil and 100-octane aviation fuel. The results were predictable. Fires and explosions killed men who had survived combat missions. Despite everything, the Mustang did its job. It could reach targets the jets could not. It could remain on station long after jets were forced to leave. It could operate from forward bases the jets could never use. North Korean troops learned to fear the sound of the Merlin engine. They feared napalm most of all. Pilots from the 51st Fighter Interceptor Squadron developed a hybrid napalm mixture combined with thermite that burned hot enough to melt the rubber right off tank road wheels. These punishing attacks forced North Korean forces to move only at night and to camouflage everything. Vehicles were hidden under any available cover. Tanks were sometimes driven into houses or haystacks to escape the Mustangs circling overhead. The Royal Australian Air Force's No. 77 Squadron flew Mustangs in Korea from July 1950 through April 1951, when they converted to Gloster Meteor jets. They suffered significant casualties during that period while helping United Nations forces hold the line around Pusan. Australian Mustangs also escorted American B-29 bombers on raids against enemy airfields. The South African Air Force's No. 2 Squadron flew Mustangs from November 1950 until they transitioned to F-86 Sabres. Their losses were severe. 12 pilots killed in action and 30 listed as missing. Flying as part of the United States 18th Fighter Bomber Wing, the South Africans earned a reputation for professionalism and discipline under fire. The South Koreans flew Mustangs throughout the war. For them, it was not a choice. They could not afford jets. The Mustang was the backbone of their Air Force, flown by pilots fighting for survival of their own country. Some of those pilots were veterans of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy Air Services from World War II. They knew how to fly, they knew how to fight, and they knew they might not return. By 1953, the Mustang was finally being replaced by jet fighter bombers. The F-84 Thunderjet and the F-86 Sabre assumed most ground attack duties. The last American F-51s were transferred to the South Korean Air Force in January of that year. The age of the propeller-driven fighter in American service was coming to an end. The final U.S. Air Force Mustang, an F-51D assigned to the West Virginia Air National Guard's 167 Fighter Bomber Squadron, was withdrawn from service on January 27, 1957. It was retired to what was then known as the Air Force Center Museum. But for one brief moment, on May 6, 1957, it was brought back to life to fly in the 50th anniversary aerial firepower demonstration at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. One last flight for the old warrior. Elsewhere in the world, however, the Mustang was only just beginning its next chapter. In the summer of 1948, a fragile new nation called Israel was fighting for its very existence. The British Mandate of Palestine had ended in May, and the State of Israel had declared independence. Within hours, armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq crossed its borders. Israel possessed almost no air force. Its enemies flew Spitfires and Hurricanes supplied by Britain, while Israel relied on a patchwork collection of light civilian aircraft hastily converted for combat, and a small number of Czechoslovak-built Avias that were barely airworthy. Israeli agents in the United States went searching for real fighters and located 4 P-51 Mustangs for sale. The problem was political. The United States had imposed an arms embargo on the Middle East. President Harry Truman supported humanitarian aid to Israel, but had blocked weapons sales. Exporting military aircraft was illegal. Al Schwimmer, a New York-born flight engineer who would later help found Israel Aerospace Industries, coordinated the operation. The Israelis resorted to ingenuity. The Mustangs were created and labeled as agricultural machinery manufactured by an international company. No one seemed to question what kind of farm equipment weighed 3 tons and arrived packed in airplane-shaped crates. The first 2 Mustangs reached Israel in September 1948. Mechanics worked around the clock assembling them on a makeshift airstrip hidden among orange groves near Herzliya. Within days, the aircraft were flying combat missions. They immediately became the most capable fighters in the Israeli inventory, faster and with longer range than anything the Arab armies could field. With range that spanned the entire Middle East, the Mustangs were used for reconnaissance, ground attack, and interception. They could reach Damascus or Cairo and return on a single tank of fuel. No other Israeli aircraft could match that reach. On November 20th, 1948, a Royal Air Force de Havilland Mosquito was flying a reconnaissance mission over Israel. British aircraft had operated with near impunity, confident that no Israeli fighter could reach their altitude. Earlier interception attempts had failed. That day, an American volunteer pilot, Wayne Peake, scrambled in a Mustang from Ekron Air Base. He climbed to altitude, intercepted the Mosquito, and shot it down. The message was unmistakable. The skies over Israel now belonged to Israel. On January 5, 1949, just 2 days before the final ceasefire of the War of Independence, 2 Mustangs were escorting T-6 Harvard trainers that had been pressed into service as ground attack aircraft. They encountered Egyptian fighters over the battlefield. In the dogfight that followed, the Mustangs shot down 3 enemy aircraft. It was the Mustang's final air combat action of that war. Although the War of Independence ended in early 1949, the Mustangs continued to fly. Israeli pilots carried out reconnaissance missions over neighboring Arab states for years afterward. In April 1951, 4 Mustangs and 4 Spitfires attacked Syrian positions at Al-Hama after Syrian forces ambushed and killed 7 Israeli soldiers. In April 1954, when an Israeli Navy ship ran aground near Saudi Arabia, Mustangs flew cover for the rescue operation. When recovery proved impossible, they bombed the vessel to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. By the mid-1950s, the Israeli Air Force was beginning to acquire jet fighters. Gloster Meteors arrived first, followed by Dassault Auraigans and Mystiers from France. The Mustang gradually lost its frontline role. Many were placed in storage. Only one unit, Squadron 116, remained operational, primarily tasked with training new pilots. Then came October 1956 and the Suez Crisis. Israel, France, and Britain secretly agreed to attack Egypt after President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. The plan called for Israel to strike first, giving Britain and France a justification to intervene. Israel pulled its Mustangs out of storage and formed a second squadron. Thanks to their long range, the aircraft were assigned to attack Egyptian planes at distant airfields, some beyond the Suez Canal on the African mainland. But the Mustangs were also given a mission unlike anything they had ever attempted. On October 29th, at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 pairs of P-51 Mustangs streaked westward across the Sinai Desert. They flew at treetop height, so low that their propellers nearly brushed the sand. Their objective was to sever Egyptian telephone lines using the aircraft themselves. Israeli intelligence knew that Egyptian command and control depended heavily on landlines running through the desert. If those lines were cut, Egyptian units would be unable to coordinate their defense. Radio communication was unreliable. The telephone network was the nervous system of the Egyptian army. A special device had been designed for the task. It consisted of a weighted cable attached to the tail of the aircraft, intended to snag and tear down the wires. During the mission, some of the devices broke free. The pilots did not turn back. Instead, they flew even lower, using their wings and spinning propellers to slice through the telephone lines directly. It was an act of near-suicidal courage. At altitudes measured in feet, rather than hundreds of feet, a single error meant instant death. The pilot succeeded. Egyptian communications across the Sinai collapsed just as Israeli paratroopers were dropping at the Mitla Pass. Egyptian commanders suddenly found themselves unable to contact forward units. The resulting confusion helped speed the Israeli advance. The Mustang had found yet another role. It was no longer only a fighter or a bomber. It had become a wire cutter. Israel kept its Mustangs in service until January 15, 1961. By then, jet aircraft had completely assumed the frontline role. Yet the Mustang had proven itself adaptable beyond anything its designers could have imagined. While the Mustang was fighting wars in Asia and the Middle East, it was also beginning a very different kind of life in the United States. After the war, surplus Mustangs attracted a new breed of pilot. Men who had flown them in combat wanted to fly them again, but now for sport. Air racing had existed before the war. The Thompson Trophy race in Cleveland had drawn crowds of more than 100,000 people during the Great Depression. Those pre-war races, however, relied on specially built aircraft, small, purpose-designed machines created for nothing but speed. After 1945, everything changed. The races opened to military surplus. Suddenly, ordinary civilians could buy fighters that had cost the government around $50,000 for less than the price of a used car. The Mustang was nearly ideal for racing. It was fast in a straight line, relatively forgiving to fly, compared to temperamental aircraft like the Corsair, and highly adaptable to modification. Racers stripped away armor and guns to reduce weight. They smoothed the airframe, filled every rivet hole, and pushed the Merlin engines for more power. Some even relocated the radiator from the belly to the wingtips to cut drag. In 1946, Paul Mance won the Bendix Trophy Transcontinental Race, flying a Mustang at an average speed of 435 miles per hour. Jackie Cochran finished second in another Mustang at 420 miles per hour. In 1948, Mance won again, with Cochran finishing third. That year, the first 3 finishers were separated by less than 3 miles per hour. the closest transcontinental air race ever recorded. At Cleveland, the Thompson Trophy pylon races showcase heavily modified Mustangs screaming around the course at speeds the designers had never imagined. Modified Corsairs and Mustangs exceeded 400 miles per hour, pulling enormous G-forces in the turns. But air racing carried deadly risks. In 1947, Tony Giannuzzi was killed when carbon monoxide leaked into the cockpit of his modified Corsair during the Thompson Trophy race. His aircraft crashed while the race continued around the wreckage. Cook Cleland won that year at a record speed of 396 miles per hour. Then came September 5, 1949, and Bill Odom's fatal crash. The deaths of Odom and the Lear family ended the Cleveland races forever. Organizers could not risk another catastrophe in a residential area. The Civil Aeronautics Administration threatened to ban future events. Sponsors withdrew. Beginning in 1950, surplus military aircraft were barred from competition. The Mustang racers were grounded. The airplanes that had dominated post-war air racing sat idle in hangars and on tie-down lines, waiting for a future that might never arrive. They would not race competitively again for 15 years. In 1964, a boat racing champion named Bill Stead decided to resurrect air racing in the Nevada desert near Reno. Stead was both a showman and a savvy businessman. He secured a contract with ABC's Wide World of Sports. He persuaded casino owners in Reno that air races would draw tourists. He found a small airport called Sky Ranch, perched on a plateau nearly 5,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by mountains and far from any residential neighborhoods. The Mustangs emerged from storage. Pilots who had kept their Warbirds alive through the lean years suddenly had a reason to fly them again. A new generation of young pilots, too young to have fought in World War II, discovered the thrill of racing the same aircraft their fathers had flown in combat. Modified Mustangs with names like Striga, Voodoo, and Red Baron became legends at Reno. They regularly exceeded 450 miles per hour, faster than the aircraft had ever flown during wartime service. The Reno races became the premier air racing event in the world, drawing hundreds of thousands of spectators every September. The racing circuit continues to this day, and Mustangs remain among the most competitive aircraft in the unlimited class. Competition has driven modification far beyond anything the original designers envisioned. Racing Mustangs now run engines producing more than 3,000 horsepower, nearly double their wartime output. Some have clipped wings for improved roll rates. Others feature stretched fuselages and radically altered cooling systems. Some of these machines have been flying for more than 80 years. They have outlived their designers, their original pilots, and even many of the nations they once served. Every year at Reno, they demonstrate that the Mustang performance limits have still not been fully explored. But racing was only one part of the story. During the 1950s and 1960s, the P-51 remained a frontline fighter in dozens of air forces around the world. The Philippines acquired more than 100 Mustangs after World War II. They became the backbone of the post-war Philippine Army Air Corps and later the Philippine Air Force. Filipino pilots flew Mustangs against communist hook insurgents during the emergency of the late 1940s and early 1950s. They also used them against Moro rebels in the southern Philippines. The Mustang was the first aircraft flown by the Philippine Air Demonstration Team, formed in 1953 and known as the Blue Diamonds. Indonesia acquired Mustangs from the departing Netherlands East Indies Air Force in 1949 and 1950, then received additional aircraft from the United States. Indonesian Mustangs flew against multiple internal rebellions during the 1950s, including the CIA-backed Permesta rebels in 1958. On May 18th of that year, an Indonesian Mustang scored what remains the only confirmed aerial victory in the history of the Indonesian Air Force. Captain Ignatius Dewano was flying AP-51D when he intercepted AB-26 Invader over Maluku Islands near Ambon. The Invader was piloted by Alan Lawrence Pope, an American CIA contract pilot, supporting the Permesta Rebellion. Duano shot him down. Pope survived, was captured, sentenced to death, and eventually released in 1962. Guatemala operated around 30 Mustangs from 1954 into the early 1970s. Haiti flew 4 Mustangs during the rule of President Paul Eugene Magloire between 1950 and 1956. The last Haitian Mustangs were retired in 1973 or 1974 and sold for spare parts. Sweden operated more than 160 Mustangs under the designation J-26. Some were modified for photographic reconnaissance and redesignated S-26. These aircraft took part in secret Swedish mapping missions of Soviet military installations along the Baltic coast in 1946 and 1947. The operation, codenamed Phelan, involved deliberate violations of Soviet airspace. The Mustang could outdive any Soviet fighter of the era, and none were lost during these missions. The Chinese Nationalist Air Force flew Mustangs against communist forces during the Chinese Civil War. When the Nationalists retreated to Taiwan in 1949, their Mustangs went with them. Communist forces captured 39 Mustangs left behind on the mainland. In October 1949, 9 of those captured aircraft flew in the military parade celebrating the founding of the People's Republic of China. Mao watched American-built fighters pass overhead wearing communist markings. Yet the most remarkable Mustang operator of all would be the Dominican Republic. The Fuerza Aérea Dominicana received its first Mustangs on September 29, 1948. The initial aircraft were flown by Brazilian mercenaries, veterans of World War II, who trained more than 100 Dominican pilots between 1948 and 1950. Over the following years, the Dominicans acquired additional Mustangs, including 32 Swedish F-51DS purchased in 1952 and 1953. These aircraft became the backbone of Dominican air power for more than 3 decades. They were among the most vividly painted fighters in the world, wearing bright color schemes and aggressive shark-mouthed nose art that made them look like airborne predators. Dominican Mustangs saw combat during Constanza's invasion of 1959, when exiles attempted to overthrow the Trujillo dictatorship. They flew again during the April Revolution of 1965, when civil war erupted and American forces intervened. During Operation Power Pack, the U.S. intervention in the Dominican Republic, a Mustang was shot down. It was the last Mustang ever destroyed in combat. Even so, the Dominicans kept flying them. When their de Havilland Vampire jets wore out in the 1970s and were not replaced, the Mustangs once again became the only armed fighters in the Dominican inventory. The bright paint schemes were replaced with camouflage, but the shark mouths remained. In 1983, a Cuban intelligence ship refused to leave Dominican waters despite repeated warnings. The Dominican Air Force responded with its Mustangs, strafing the vessel until it finally withdrew. Cuba retaliated by sending MiG-21 jets to buzz Dominican air bases. The Mustang pilots knew better than to challenge supersonic jets with propeller fighters. As one pilot later recalled, they went inside and hid until the MiGs went away. The humiliation pushed the Dominican government to request American assistance. The United States eventually supplied A-37 Dragonfly attack jets, which assumed the ground attack and counterinsurgency role. The Dominican Mustangs were finally retired in 1984, 40 years after the aircraft's operational debut. 9 surviving airframes were sold back to American collectors. They had outlasted every other Mustang operator in the world. But before the Dominicans retired their Mustangs, the aircraft had one final war to fight. In July 1969, the United States was preparing to land men on the moon. In Vietnam, American jets were battling Soviet-designed MiGs at supersonic speeds. Phantoms and MiG-21s clashed over the jungle using radar-guided missiles. The propeller fighters seemed like ancient history. Yet in Central America, a very different conflict was about to erupt. El Salvador and Honduras had been locked in tension for years over land rights and immigration. El Salvador was small and densely populated, while Honduras was larger but sparsely settled. Hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans had migrated to Honduras in search of work on banana plantations and farmland. Honduran land reforms in the 1960s displaced many of these immigrants, sending them back to El Salvador and creating resentment that simmered for years. The spark came during the 1970 World Cup qualifying matches. El Salvador and Honduras were drawn into the same group. Games played in June 1969 triggered riots in both countries. Fans fought in the stands and violence spilled into the streets. After El Salvador won the decisive match 3-2 on June 26, it severed diplomatic relations with Honduras. On July 14, 1969, El Salvador invaded. Both nations fielded air forces from another era. Honduras flew F-4U Corsairs, the bent-wing naval fighters of World War II. They had roughly 17 Corsairs, a mix of F-4U-4S and F-4U-5S. El Salvador also operated Corsairs, Goodyear-built FG-1DS, along with a small force of Cavalier Mustang IIs. The Cavalier Mustangs were unusual machines. They were modernized P-51DS, upgraded by the Cavalier Aircraft Corporation in Florida, with improved engines, updated avionics, and wingtip fuel tanks for extended range. El Salvador had purchased 5 of them, along with 1 dual-control trainer, only a year earlier. The war that followed became the last conflict in history in which piston-engine aircraft fought one another in aerial combat. The opening attack bordered on the absurd. On the evening of July 14th, a Salvadoran C-47 transport, never designed as a bomber, flew over the Honduran air base at Tonkinton. Crewmen manually rolled 100-pound bombs out the cargo door, hoping to destroy aircraft parked in the open. They missed everything, but the fighting quickly escalated. Both air forces launched ground attack missions against enemy troops and infrastructure. Mustangs and Corsairs strafed and bombed with rockets, napalm, and machine gun fire. On July 17, 1969, Captain Fernando Soto of the Honduran Air Force took off on his 4th mission of the day. He was flying an F-4U-5 Corsair armed with 20mm cannons, tasked with supporting Honduran troops resisting the Salvadoran advance. As Soto and his 2 wingmen approached the combat zone, he ordered a weapons check. One wingman, Captain Zepeda, reported that his cannons had jammed. Soto ordered him to return to base. Zepeda turned for home alone. As he did, 2 Salvadoran Cavalier Mustangs spotted him and dove to attack. Zepeda was suddenly fighting for his life. The Mustangs were flown by Captains Douglas Varela and Leonel Lovo. They could hardly believe their luck. A lone Honduran Corsair, apparently defenseless, right in front of them. Varela lined up for the kill. Zepeda threw his aircraft into violent evasive maneuvers. Varela fired his .50 caliber machine guns, but missed. Zepeda continued twisting and turning, screaming for help over the radio. Soto heard him. He and his remaining wingman, Captain Acosta, immediately jettisoned their bombs and dove toward the fight. Varela was fixated on Zepeda, trying to line up another shot, when Soto dropped him behind him. Soto opened fire with his 20mm cannons. The shells ripped into the Mustang, and Varela's aircraft went down. The second Mustang pilot, Lovo, tried to flee. Soto pursued him and shot him down as well. 2 kills in minutes. But Soto was not finished. After the dogfight, Soto and Acosta pressed on toward their original target area. There, they spotted 2 Salvadoran G-1D Corsairs returning from a mission. Soto moved in to engage. He shot down both aircraft. In a single day, Fernando Soto had scored 3 confirmed aerial victories, 1 Mustang and 2 Corsairs. They were the final confirmed kills ever achieved in combat between propeller-driven fighters. His aircraft, an F-4U-5 Corsair numbered 609, is preserved today at the Honduran Air Museum with 3 kill markings painted beneath the cockpit. The war ended the following day with a ceasefire brokered by the Organization of American States. More than 3,000 people were killed in just 100 hours of fighting. Tens of thousands more were displaced. Yet the conflict earned a permanent place in aviation history. Corsairs against Mustangs, propeller against propeller. The air battles of World War II fought one final time over the jungles of Central America, 24 years after the Great War had ended. After 1969, the combat career of the P-51 Mustang was finally over, but the airplane itself refused to die. Remember Ed Maloney, the teenager who had watched Mustangs being cut apart at Calero Field in 1945? He never forgot the vow he made that day. As he worked odd jobs and scraped together money, he continued buying old Warbirds one at a time. Sometimes he traded one aircraft for another that was rarer or carried greater historical significance. On January 12, 1957, Maloney opened his growing collection to the public. It became the first aviation museum west of the Rocky Mountains. He displayed aircraft wherever he could find room, moving the collection several times over the years. In 1970, Maloney partnered with car collector Jim Bricker to display aircraft alongside classic automobiles at an attraction called Movie World Cars of the Stars and Planes of Fame in Buena Park, California. The venture did not last long, but the name Planes of Fame endured. By 1973, Maloney secured a permanent home at Chino Airport. It was the same place where he had once watched airplanes destroyed nearly 30 years earlier. What had once been Calero Field was now surrounded by civilian aviation. Volunteers poured in to help restore the aircraft to flying condition. Maloney was not alone. Across the United States, former pilots and mechanics were rescuing Mustangs from junkyards, foreign air forces, and remote storage fields. They tracked down aircraft in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic. They recovered wrecks from crash sites around the world. They relearned how to maintain Merlin engines that Rolls-Royce had stopped producing decades before. The Warbird movement grew into a global phenomenon. Restoration shops specializing in World War II aircraft opened in the United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Part suppliers hunted down original components and manufactured new ones to original specifications. In the 1960s, a restored, flyable Mustang might sell for around $30,000. By the 1980s, that figure had climbed past $100,000. Today, an airworthy P-51 typically commands between $2 and $4 million. Exceptional examples with documented combat histories have sold for more than $5 million. There are now more than 160 airworthy Mustangs worldwide, with over 200 listed on the FAA registry in the United States alone. Most of them still fly. They appear at air shows from Oshkosh, Wisconsin to Wanaka, New Zealand. They race at Reno. They star in films. Tom Cruise owns one and flies it himself. His Mustang appeared in Top Gun, Maverick in 2022. These aircraft carry the names of the men who flew them in combat. Names like Cripes Mighty, Sierra Sioux 2, and Man O' War. Their paint schemes recreate the markings of fighter groups that existed 8 decades ago. The checkered-tailed Mustangs of the Tuskegee Airmen, the red-nosed fighters of the 4th Fighter Group, the blue-striped aircraft of the 357th. Inside the cockpits, restorers have reinstalled armor plate and deactivated machine guns. Some aircraft retain original World War II-era radios alongside discrete modern avionics. The goal is authenticity, not just preserving the machine, but preserving the history it represents. In 2014, a Mustang named Sierra Sioux 2 completed a 3-year restoration by Air Corps Aviation in Minnesota. The restoration team confirmed that nearly every component on the aircraft was original to its 1944 construction at North American Aviation's factory in Inglewood, California. Only the engine mounts, ailerons, and flaps had been replaced. It is considered the most original P-51D Mustang still flying. Sierra Sioux 2 had served in the European theater with the 402nd Fighter Squadron during the final months of the war. After 1945, it was sold to Sweden, then to Nicaragua. before passing through civilian ownership in the United States. Its restoration returned it precisely to its appearance in April 1945. The aircraft earned the Reserve Grand Champion World War II Award and the Golden Wrench Award at the 2015 Air Venture in Oshkosh. In May 2013, a pilot named Doug Matthews set a world altitude record for piston-engine aircraft flying a Mustang called the Rebel. He climbed to 42,568 feet over Lake Okeechobee in Florida. The airplane was nearly 70 years old and performed flawlessly. That record still stands. Ed Maloney died on August 19, 2016. It was National Aviation Day, established in 1939 to honor the birthday of Orville Wright. Maloney had spent his entire adult life saving warbirds from destruction. His museum now houses more than 50 aircraft, many still in flying condition. His sons and the children of his friends continue the work. His son-in-law, Steve Hinton, became one of the most celebrated warbird pilots in the world. Steve's son, Stephen Hinton Jr., went on to become a 7-time Reno Air Race's unlimited gold champion. The legacy continues. The P-51 Mustang had been designed in just 102 days to answer an urgent British request in early 1940. The British Purchasing Commission had asked North American Aviation to build Curtiss P-40 fighters under license. North American's president, Dutch Kindleberger, proposed designing something better instead. The prototype flew in October 1940. It was meant to be a stopgap until better fighters could be developed. Instead, it became the defining American fighter of World War II. The early versions, powered by the Allison engine, struggled at high altitude. But when British engineers installed a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine into the Mustang airframe, the aircraft was completely transformed. With the Merlin, the Mustang could fly higher, faster, and farther than any other American fighter of its era. By late 1943, Mustangs were escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. They destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in the air over Europe and thousands more on the ground. In the final months of the Pacific War, they escorted B-29 bombers all the way to Tokyo. When the fighting ended, the Mustang refused to fade into history. Instead, it reinvented itself again and again. It became a ground attack aircraft in Korea, a wire cutter over Sinai, a counterinsurgency fighter in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Central America, a pylon racer screaming over the Nevada desert, a flying museum piece for generations who never experienced the war firsthand. Machines are not supposed to outlive their original purpose by 8 decades. But the Mustang still flies today because people refuse to let it die. Preservationists like Ed Maloney pulled airframes back from the scrapyard. Pilots flew their supposedly obsolete fighters into combat one last time. Restorers spent years rebuilding shattered wrecks into award-winning aircraft. Collectors invested millions to keep Merlin engines turning. The factory in Inglewood closed long ago. The last new Mustang rolled off a production line in 1945. Yet the sound of that engine, the howl of 12 cylinders at full power, still fills the sky at air shows from California to New Zealand. That is what happened to the P-51 Mustang after World War II. It became something more than an airplane. It became a symbol of an era that refuses to end. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Every story matters. Every story deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to lifelong history enthusiasts. You are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.